Okay, well, I know we'll have some folks joining us as we talk, but I will dive in. Welcome, everyone. My name is Jennifer Wardell, the Executive Director with Just Lead Washington. Very excited to be here with my amazing colleagues, KJ Williams, Larry Carlson, and Adish and Jaffe. You'll be hearing from them in just a moment. I believe many, if not most of you, have been with us for the last couple of leadership webinars that we've done in this series called Adaptive Leadership for Nimble Leadership in Uncertain Times. So I won't go through a full introduction today. If you want to hear more about what Just Lead's up to or what Reverb DEI is up to or Majors Leadership, Michelle Majors, our other partner, couldn't be here today, but check us out on our websites, or we'll have some resources at the end that we'll share out with our contact info. If you were with us for the first couple of sessions, we started zeroing in on how we can take care of ourselves in this really historic and challenging time that we are living in. And then we talked in the second session about how we can care for and work with teams in times of isolation. The world has gotten worse and not better since we were last together. And I want to ground everyone in the moment that we're living in today. And we're going to get started with that. But first, just invite you to take a breath. Hopefully you are able to be present with us in this moment, and we're going to dive deep. And with that, I want to first start off with Adish and Jaffe, who is going to talk a little bit more about the time that we're living in.
Hi, everybody. Do I have a twin pandemic slide, Jen? Can you hear me? There it is. Okay. Hello, everybody. I'm Ada, and when I first did the blog, which some of you may have read, about the 4 phases of going through the crisis that at that point we were going through, which was the COVID-19 crisis. We had a number of webinars, and the number one request that I was getting from people who are working in equity and justice was that everything seemed so chaotic that they were having difficulty finding meaning in how they could move forward as people who are committed to equity and justice work. And so that led me to try to deconstruct what was happening into phases. And so I came up with these 4 phases, which for those of you who have, we'll get to the drawing for that later, but for history, for those of you who read the article, and for those who, thank you, toggling back and forth, I identified the first phase as the crisis phase of the pandemic. At that point, only one pandemic as of that point, which was the novel coronavirus. And that was the all hands on deck phase, where everybody was just scrambling to figure out how to get a mask, or if they needed one, or a test, or hospitals were overflowing. People were at the earliest phases of massive morbidity and mortality. And for equity and justice workers, the crisis phase involved sheltering in place, increasing calls to domestic violence victim assistance organizations by 40% overnight because of sheltering in place with abusers. And similarly, evictions because of job loss leading to homelessness. And in phase 2 mitigation, there were efforts being made by first, second, and third level responders in law and justice to go to the governor and ask for example, a moratorium on evictions to reduce the homelessness threat, and immediate boosts in unemployment benefits and the loosening of restrictions on gaining them, and so forth. And in the mitigation phase, also what we learned was a lot of the crisis responses were not working as we had envisioned them. And so someone had to go in there and repair it and say, landlords are not obeying the moratorium. How can we put something in place to enforce it? So those are examples of things in crisis and mitigation. Then the third level, which I will say we have not reached, we're just starting to think about, is recovery, which given the ignition sparked by the horrible need to call something other than recovery. And Jen and I were talking about what
I'm
we
sorry
might
to interrupt, but can you turn your video off for a bit because you're cutting in and out? It might be easier to hear you.
Oh, turn the video off? Okay. Does that improve it at all?
We'll see how it goes.
Okay. I've turned everything off I can, so I'll just get quicker. And so recovery, which I might now, with the twin pandemics we're facing, which are intertwined, I might call reimagining, that we are reimagining not a return to the status quo, which was racist, racialized, anti-Black, Indigenous, and people of color, but rather reimagining how we move into the future in ways that do not perpetuate harm, but rather start to undo it or dismantle it. And so that's how I would refresh this particular slide. And then finally, in the last phase, which is how do we leverage the horrible convulsions that will promote and reinforce and in fact insist on durable change, the overthrow of the pre-COVID, George Floyd murder status quo, and throw that over for something else. So now in the second slide, which then is the last thing I'll do, Jen, if you could do the double helix slide. Some of you may know about the double helix image, which is the imagery of how our DNA works. And so I was trying to figure out an image to interweave the are going through societally. The first one being COVID, say that's the red ribbon. And the second, the blue ribbon, being virulent racism. And the bands that hold these two together, so they literally cannot come apart, would be represented by food deserts, inadequate access to health care, decent housing, economic opportunity, education, and so forth. And those are the systemic links that reveal racism. And COVID, of course, was the big reveal, because what COVID has shown us is that for Black communities, they're experiencing death and illness at either double to as much as 5 times the rate as white communities, depending on what zip code you're in. And similarly for Indigenous communities, particularly on Indian reservations, as high as 8 or 9 times the morbidity and mortality rate is for white communities. And revealing this as completely unacceptable. For Latinx communities, it's 5 to 7% morbidity and mortality compared to whites. So the big reveal is COVID, and what it's revealing is the blue strip. So that is just the quick sketch of how I came to write the article and how it actually already needs to be revised to incorporate what we're seeing in the compulsive movements against the reporting and the taking of Black bodies.
Ada, it sounds like what you just said sounded really important, and we didn't catch all of it. Do you think you could sum up just your last kind of 60 seconds for us?
Sure. And I'm so sorry about my internet. I don't know how to fix it. To me, um, the goal of this adaptive leadership series is helping people who are committed to this work, equity and justice work, to find frameworks to help them make meaning of what in the world is going on so that we can move forward together. And if we have shared language like twin pandemics, if we have shared language like we are now in the recovery phase or reimagining phase, the crisis phase is going to come back over and over and over again. But if we lump all these four phases together, crisis, mitigation, reimagining, leveraging for durable change, it's too much. We have to deconstruct and think, what phase is my organization most able to make a contribution to durable change in? So I might say my organization is not on the front lines. And so my job is to support those people who are on the front lines the best I can. But I'm not running to a DV shelter to do that work right now. So I will support the first and second responders who are doing that. My organization will be best, whatever it might be, at reimagining a future which is not racist, and treasure personal sacrifice, organizational sacrifice, into doing everything I can to disrupt the old order and to put into place what's necessary to make a new order. So that's the vision about phase-based thinking.
Thank you, Ada.
You're welcome.
Thank you all for joining us today. That was the amazing Ada Shin-Jaffe. This is really her framework that KJ and I are going to be working on filling in and teasing out a little bit with you all today. I will mention that we encourage you to type questions into the chat box. Whoever is not speaking at any given time will be keeping an eye on that chat box. So if you have questions, that's a great way to get them answered. There's also a hand raise function for those who don't know. If you go to participants, do we have hand raising on this? I should have asked you, Jen, I'm sorry. Yes, we do. Okay, so raise your hand and we can call on you. If we're missing it, if we don't see you, just go ahead and interrupt. It's fine too.
Speaking of interrupting, I would just add the Q&A function. If you have anything you're not comfortable asking directly in a chat, want to do anonymously, you can use the Q&A function that you'll also find at the bottom of your screen.
Yes, and that doesn't go to all the participants, that just goes to the panelists. So a couple of options there. And we're gonna dig a little bit into phase one, the crisis phase. Some of this is gonna be a fairly brief review. It'll be a little bit of what we went over in our first webinar, keeping ourselves well and moving ourselves out of crisis mode. But we just wanted to give you a little bit of review in this, within this great context that Ada has given us of these four phases, but also to acknowledge that, as Ada talked about, we have a new pandemic. It's not a new pandemic to most folks in our society, but it has newly surfaced. It has surfaced in a new way, and it's a new moment in our society. And it's brought a lot of pain and a lot of trauma to folks. And so we want to acknowledge that whereas we might be moving on to phase 2 or 3 in the pandemic, we are certainly, many of us, still sitting right there squarely in that first box of crisis when it comes to systemic racism and anti-Black racism specifically. So as we talk through this, I want you to keep that in mind, where you can tease out kind of, yeah, I've gotten a flow with a pandemic. I'm still really grappling in that first phase with the anti-Black racism that's happening. Keep both of these pandemics in your mind if you can. And as Ada acknowledged, let's look at how they're interrelated, because they are incredibly interrelated. If you were with us in the last webinar, we went through the stages of grief. I like to talk about how nonlinear the phases of grief, or the stages of grief, are. So you have denial and isolation, acceptance, bargaining, depression, and anger, but you might be feeling them all at the same time, or you might be feeling one and then the next hour pivoting to another one. I really like the framing of a stew. There was a great social worker once who told me it's less of a linear series of stages and more of a stew. Different things come up as you stir things as you go along. I also want to point out that when it comes to the anti-Black racism that we're dealing with right now, we all have different kinds of grief. So as a white person, I'm definitely feeling anger and sadness. I'm feeling a lot of this, but it's a very different grief than someone who is Black is feeling, because that person is an impacted person. They're the most impacted. So I want to caution us as white folks about sharing our grief and our sadness with those who are more impacted than we are, and encourage you to reach out to your white friends and process through that grief with your white friends, because what we can put ourselves in is a situation where we're asking folks of color to emotionally caretake us, which is literally the last thing they need on their plate right now. These are some things that you might be feeling in your body right now. This is how our bodies cope with high stress and high levels of cortisol. There might be one of these that you use more than others. There might be many of them that you use in different circumstances. I think it's always a good idea to slow down and realize what's happening in our body, so that we can bring those cortisol levels down, so that we can realize, oh, the reason that I just ran away instead of finishing that conversation just now is because I was triggered. Our bodies give us lots of information that's helpful for us in these moments of crisis. Speaking of bringing cortisol levels down, many of you know of the Trauma Steward Institute, and we highlighted that in our first webinar as well. They're great folks and have some wonderful ideas for us when we're in crisis and when we're experiencing grief. So this is a great little tiny survival guide that they put out at the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic. And it just gives you some ideas of how to keep yourself well. I keep it up next to my computer so that every day when I sit down to work, I see it and I remind myself. Some of the things that I'll highlight are protecting your mornings. So if you are glued to the news from the moment you wake up, you're on Facebook while you're still lying in bed, you're filling yourself with cortisol at the very beginning of your day. I had this wonderful day early on in the pandemic where someone texted me and said, Kishi Bashi is on Facebook Live right now. He's one of my favorite artists. And instead of listening to NPR like I normally would, I hopped on Facebook and listened to his music and watched him play and watched the joy in his face. And I had a very different day because of it. It was a great learning experience early on in this first pandemic. Operationalizing is very important when it comes to these things. I'm sure none of us have a ton of extra time to be sitting around thinking about how to process our trauma. So I like to encourage folks to use your calendar, use sticky notes around the house, use anything that can keep you focused on the importance of using these survival tactics throughout your days. Start a morning routine. Every morning I turn on this jazz music station. Every morning, I do 5 minutes of yoga before I start off on my day. We're gonna do a writing reflection now. Oops. And I'd like you all to take a look at these questions and do just a little bit of writing. We're gonna share in the chat box after that, and this is gonna help us know what sorts of things you're still needing. What are some resources that could help you? What are things that you're struggling with? Because we will be sending some follow-up resources for you. Which response phase are you in with each pandemic? So if you're thinking about COVID-19, are you moving toward mitigation yet? Are you moving beyond that to reimagining? Where are you feeling yourself personally? And then also with anti-Black racism, how are you feeling? Are you still in crisis mode? Are you seeing glimmers of coming out of crisis mode? And then think about that organizationally as well. And then also, what do you need in order to move out of that crisis mode, if that's indeed where you are? I want to mention that if you are in crisis mode, this might feel really overwhelming to you. So if you're sitting there thinking like, I don't know, I can't breathe yet, I would just say, take this moment to breathe. Take this moment to focus on your breath, put your feet on the ground, let go of all of the tension in your body, and take this moment to recenter yourself. So don't stress if you're not feeling like you can get there. Go ahead and do just a little bit of meditation instead of answering these questions. So we're gonna do about 5 minutes of free writing and or centering ourselves in breath, and then we'll come back and we'll ask you to share in the chat box with us. If you have questions in the meantime too, please feel free to share in that chat box or raise your hand as well. And yes, I will show you the phases to use for reference. How about we do this? I'm going to go ahead and put those categories, the phases in the chat box so that we can go back to the questions on the slide. That way you can have access to both. Nope. Here we go.
Lori, you've got the survival guide up now.
Well, thank you. I'll just mention too, when you post in the chat, it would be great for everyone to be able to see, unless of course you don't want everyone to see your post. For everyone to see your post, make sure that you select all participants, or sorry, attendees, all panelists and attendees, where it says two in there. Right on. Seeing some folks posting where they are in the chat there. That's great. Take about another minute and a half or so for writing. All right, go ahead and keep writing if you're feeling the need to finish some of your thoughts, but also start posting in the chat here as some folks are doing. Miriam, thanks for pointing out that you were moving toward the mitigation and recovery phases until Black Lives Matter, our second pandemic, happened. That is a really good point, that these things are inseparable, and that in some ways we might be able to identify where we're ready to move on in one and not the other. In many ways, they are so connected. It looks like most folks are really feeling in that crisis phase still, with the anti-Black racism and violence that are happening. Start thinking too about things that you need, things that maybe we could help you with, give you resources for. This will help KJ too in her segment coming up to focus on the things that you all are needing. Yes, Heather, dedicated space to recharge, to get out of crisis mode. I wonder if that's the case for anyone else too, that your caucuses or your race equity work got put on hold because of COVID-19, and now your organization isn't quite sure what to do because you've stopped that work and now you really need to start it again. I'm guessing that you're not the only one, Miriam. All right, we're going to go ahead and move along here to our next section. And if you keep thinking of things, keep posting them. As I said, Jennifer and KJ and Ada will all be checking in on the chat box while I'm moving us forward. We're going to move into mitigation. So mitigation, this is where we're starting to show some of our coping skills. We're starting to think about policies and strategies. we're kind of pulling ourselves past that crisis point and thinking a little more deeply about how we'd like things to go. So what might happen if you have not fully come out of your crisis mode and you start trying to make decisions? I know for myself personally, that's when I get into control mode. So I'm feeling out of control because I'm still in crisis. So I'm reaching for control, which means that I'm going to be hypervigilant, that I'm going to have tunnel vision, that I'm going to be really operating from a damage control perspective. And as you can imagine, I'm not going to have full access to my creativity, to the ability to reimagine, to move forward into better policies. So what I want to talk about for just a moment is recentering around abundance. So Ada talked about having some frameworks that we can use, some mental models, to get ourselves into a better space and reimagining a different future for ourselves. And what can be helpful for me sometimes is thinking about abundance. When I come from a place of scarcity, I tend to make really lousy decisions. So what I want you to do is just close your eyes for about 10 seconds and imagine looking upstream, up a river, and having the water come crashing towards you and bringing you all the wonderful things you need, all the time you need to recharge, all the wonderful voices that will help you make great decisions. And then when you start feeling like you need to control, I want you to return to this thought of abundance. And I know it's really difficult because it doesn't feel like we have abundance, especially right now. It feels like we don't have enough time for anything. We don't have enough resources for anything. I heard someone saying that they just need more hands on deck. And I think many of us feel that way, both in our work and at home, right? Many of us are balancing childcare with our really demanding jobs right now. So yes, that is all true. And if we can get ourselves to a place where we can breathe a little more freely and center around abundance, we will be able to access these other wonderful things that will end in better decisions and a better reimagined world. So collective decision making, we never make the best decisions on our own. But it's really hard for us to, when we're trying to control things, let go a little bit of that control and have other voices involved. You've probably heard of rapid community response, but I love this term and I bet it's an Ada-ism. I don't know, but I bet it is. Rapid community listening. How can we make listening happen as soon as humanly possible? How can we listen to those most impacted, and how can we center the voices of those most impacted? And then how can we be intentional about our stakeholder engagement so that we make sure that we're getting all those voices in of folks that are most impacted? Can you explain what you mean by second pandemic or twin pandemic? Yes. So Ada spoke in the beginning a little bit about COVID-19 is our first pandemic, and then the rise of anti-Black violence and the protests resulting from that rise in violence as our second pandemic, or our twin pandemic. And twin in that they're very much intertwined. We look at all of the negative impacts on communities of color, and particularly Black communities, of COVID-19, and we can tie that very easily into the violence that's happening. So they are two separate things, but in many ways are very tied to one giant thing, which is anti-Black racism and other kinds of racism in our society. So we talked about working through our emotions. We don't just do that magically, right? There are things that we have to actively do in order to move through how we feel about things. This is one of my favorite tools, which is called Reframe the Loss Canvas. It's by an organization called Liberationist. And we'll send this out afterwards as well. We're just going to go over it very quickly here. Really, this is a way of identifying what you're losing, and then being able to come to terms with that emotionally, and then being able to move on and see what you're gaining, and reframing it as not necessarily a win, but not a loss, as something that's different and that could be better in the future. So that's something to look out for in our follow-up. And when we do that, when we move through these emotions and these feelings of loss and this need to control, we will be able to end in this place of innovation where, as Ada spoke about in the beginning, we're able to imagine a different world that doesn't involve violent racism. And I just pulled out a couple of great examples of innovation that's been happening in our world lately. Seattle's Fair Start, they had to close down all of their restaurants, and instead of just laying off all their employees, they decided, you know what, there are people who are hungry right now who aren't able to access the food they need. We're going to make meals for those people. And they have been rocking out box lunches and all sorts of meals, and just feeding thousands of people, which is so exciting and heartening. And my other favorite example of innovation is a group of sex workers started production of hand sanitizer. They were like, well, there's not enough hand sanitizer in the world. We could make that, right? Why not? So they're now partnering with local nonprofit organizations as well. So you can get little hand sanitizer bottles with your favorite nonprofit org branded on it, and half of those proceeds go to that nonprofit. So these are great examples, and we see them all over the place in the news. Let's be sending them around to each other. Just get that inspiration wheel going and get us thinking toward this different world that we want to see. We're going to take a 5-minute break right now. I want to get us to break almost on time because KJ has a lot of brilliance to leave with you today, and I don't want you to miss out on any of it. So we'll take a 5-minute break. And I just want to point out that we are modeling taking care of ourselves by doing this. How many meetings have you been in on Zoom where someone's like, I haven't peed in 6 hours, or I really need to eat, but I don't really have time, so I'm gonna have this like half a granola bar for the rest of the day. So 5 minutes, go take care of your needs, get something to eat, get a cup of warm coffee, do what you need to do for 5 minutes, and we will come back. I'm gonna keep us really on time and say we're gonna come back at 43 after. So set your watch, come back, and KJ will take us along to the next 2 phases. Oh, that's a good point too. Jen says, let's remind everyone that we're going to 1:30 and not 1 o'clock. Originally, way back when, this was supposed to go till 1, but we've extended it to 1:30. So if you can't hang with us, totally fine. But just so you know, content will definitely go till 1:30. And the recording will be available for those that can't stay.
All right, folks, hello. Welcome back from the break. Hopefully everyone had an opportunity to take care of themselves. My name is KJ Williams, and I am standing in for my colleague, Michelle Majors of Majors Leadership. So we're gonna just keep the ball rolling and jump right into phase 3 recovery. As always, if you have any questions or any comments, please put them in the chat box, and one of the other facilitators will be responding to them. So in phase 3, one of the first things we want to acknowledge and just to recognize is that we have to move from the sprint to the marathon. So recognizing that as a sprinter, you know, we recognize that we're going to put all of our time and our energy, all of the resources that we have into an activity that is pretty short so that we can reach this goal. And we're going to jump into it with full force, right? Full steam ahead. And that's what the sprint requires, right? We've got to put this energy in motion. But that's not actually sustainable for us when we think about the twin pandemics. So the current landscape really is calling for us to acknowledge that the process for transformation and for change is actually a marathon, that the strategies and the competencies that we've developed, that the skill sets that we have, the talents that we have, the energy that we have, our emotional stamina, all of those things are going to work together to provide us with the resources and the sustenance necessary so that we can maintain ourselves throughout the entire marathon. So what we want to do is recognize that though we're in this place of crisis, and for many of us, we're in different phases, as you've already identified through the chat box, that regardless of what phase we're in, it is time, as Lori has already said, to take that deep breath and recognize that we've got to move from the sprint mentality to the marathon mentality, that we're going to be in the game for the long term, and that though we may be focused on short-term goals, that in order for us to actually win the race, that we've got to ensure that we have the resources and stamina necessary so that we can stay engaged throughout the entire marathon, right? So that we can reach that end. Now, the second bullet talks about acknowledging the impact of trauma, secondary trauma, and what support is needed for your team, for your clients, and for others. But I, as someone who has been a manager and a director, a supervisor for a number of years, it's really important for me to articulate to you this a recognition that as a leader, as someone who is deeply involved in this work, whether you are supervising other people or not, because leadership doesn't require supervision, that it's important that you recognize what support you need for yourself first. So if you can go ahead and put that oxygen mask on yourself first, then you're much better positioned to create the space necessary to identify what support is needed for your team, for your clients, and for others. We know that whether it's primary or secondary trauma, that we all respond to trauma in very different ways. And so our needs are going to be different as well. And as we're going through this recovery process, or as Ada mentioned earlier, which I love the way that she reframe that into this reimagining process. Reimagine what types of support you can provide for yourself and for your team when you think about or when you're looking at things through the lens of primary or secondary trauma. And then how do we move from crisis to opportunity using Lori's framework that she shared with us just a little while ago, I think is phenomenal. I also want you to consider that in order to move from a place of crisis to opportunity, there needs to be a significant paradigm shift. And that is a personal paradigm shift in the way that you experience and you, there was a word that came up for me and I just lost it, but in the way that you personally experience a crisis. And that paradigm shift is necessary so that you can reframe your idea of crisis into this idea of, hey, this is an opportunity. Yes, there's pain. Yes, there's trauma. People are dying every day. There's harm that is consistently being caused, but where is the opportunity for something good to happen? And in order for that to take place, there has to be a paradigm shift. And so one of the ways that we can get to this paradigm shift is looking at something called targeted universalism. Now I'm going to be reading from my computer, and you know, if you could see my glasses, you'd see how thick they are. So if I put my face all the way up to the computer because I can't read it, that's okay. You can go ahead and say some funny stuff to me in the chat box, all right? But target universalism is an approach that supports the needs of the particular while reminding us that we are all part of the same social fabric. And that's by Professor John A. Powell. Now I want to read a little bit more about target universalism, and you can go to the belonging, to the Institute of Belonging, and I'm forgetting the other word that's connected to it, but there is a much deeper read on targeted universalism, but we'll send that link out as well in the resources afterwards. So targeted universalism means setting universal goals pursued by targeted processes to achieve those goals. Within a targeted universalism framework, universal goals are established for all groups concerned. The strategies developed achieve those goals. The strategies developed to achieve those goals are targeted based upon how different groups are situated within structures, culture, and across geographies to obtain the universal goal. Targeted universalism is goal-oriented, and the processes are directed in service of the explicit universal goal. By emphasizing the universal goal as a way of justifying a diversity of implementation strategies, transformative change possibilities can be envisioned, pursued, and aligned. So that targeted universalism gives us the opportunity to meet the needs of everyone while specifying the strategies and activities necessary to meet those needs based on either an individual's identity or a specific group's identity. We can take a look at the positionality of someone, and we can frame or create our policies and our strategies to be specific to meeting those individual needs while we're in pursuit of the universal goal. So some of the questions that we want to ask ourselves is, what are we doing well? So currently, right here, right now, when you think about your organization or think about the team that you're on, think about the department that you are a part of, what are you doing well? And this is important as well to identify how to move from crisis to opportunity. If you can identify what you're doing well, then that place where you're doing something well is the place of opportunity. What else can you build out from that particular, or what can you leverage from that particular activity that you're doing well? And then what are the gaps that you've noticed with the twin pandemics? What are the gaps in the services that you provide or the manner in which you provide those services? Where are the gaps in the policies that exist in the organization? Where are the gaps in terms of benefits and compensation for your employees as they're responding responding to the twin pandemics, as organizations have had to really be nimble and adapt very quickly to primarily working remotely. What many organizations are finding is that their current policies, their current employee handbooks, they weren't set up for this type of crisis. And so this is an opportunity to make much needed changes, right? And then this last question here is, how do we effectively address the intersection of trauma, impact, and professional expectations? Now, I put this question in here because as a woman of color, one of the things that is really challenging right now is the fact that my productivity has been compromised. My ability to think quickly and even to think critically has been compromised because of the twin pandemics, because I'm challenged with being at home and with teaching. I am not a teacher, right? A school teacher. I'm also challenged because I have children and because I'm Black, and because I'm constantly worried and concerned about the safety of not just myself, but my family members and my friends. And then also thinking about the impact of that trauma, right? The impact. That means that, you know, sometimes I wake up and I have a migraine headache, and I might have that headache for 2 days. Other ways that stress manifests itself in our lives and through our bodies. And especially for those of you that are supervising other individuals, it's really important to create the space for yourself to think about those individuals that you have responsibility for supervising, and the intersection of that trauma and the impact to their lives, and then the professional expectations that you have of them, right? So I know that I've had to go through a process, and I work on a great team. So the Just Lead team is amazing. And so I am really privileged in being able to say to the team, I'm not doing well today. I'm not thinking very clearly today. And I know that I had this deadline that was for tomorrow, but because I'm incapacitated for a number of reasons, I'm not going to be able to make that deadline. Can I push that out? And also acknowledging that for people of color and for people of other marginalized identities, that asking for that type of support is almost sometimes synonymous with acknowledging that you're not up to par, that you are not able to get the job done. And that is a fear that is very difficult for people to articulate, because on the other side of that, I'm going to be worried. Am I going to lose my job? What are my team members thinking about me? All of a sudden, I'm not, the bright person that I thought I was, because I can't meet any deadlines. And so these are just questions to ask yourself, to sit with, and to consider as you're continuing to navigate the recovery phase. All right, so we are going to move on to to the next slide. All right, so we're moving into phase 4 here, where we're talking about durable systems change, a broad understanding of systemic failures and opportunity for change. So what you have, let's go to the next slide, please. Thank you. What we have here is, this is from the Harvard Business Publishing. You'll receive this resource as well. And so I just pulled this out because I think it's a really great tool to begin thinking about how do we negotiate, or how do we navigate phase 4 when we're thinking about creating a durable systemic change. One of the questions I think it's important to ask ourselves in light of our organizations is, are we a learning organization? And so I'm going to give you a moment to just kind of read through this, but I'll talk while you're reading through it. So the supportive learning environment, and this is when I'm squishing my face up against the computer because it's so tiny. So employees are able to speak their mind without fear of retaliation or punitive consequences. I'm not going to read the whole thing. Why is that important? If we're thinking about creating durable systemic change, then we want input from our employees. We want input from our staff. And in order for us to receive input that's beneficial, then staff and employees, they need to feel like they are safe. They need to know that when they give their input, when they share their ideas, that they're not going to be penalized, right? And then those concrete learning processes and practices. We have to have things in place so that we can actually navigate what needs to be navigated. So we're open to experimentation and, good gracious, and relevant data collection, analysis and interpretation of data, education and training, and responsible adaptation. So this is great because if we are willing to create these concrete learning processes, then we also create this opportunity to not only transform our organization in terms of the services that we provide, but we have the opportunity to transform the experience of employees within the context of our organization, which then transform the experiences of our clients and those that we serve, right? And those things are going to be important, that we're able to create these processes, have the data to support whatever the new mechanisms that we are putting into place. And then last but not least, leadership that reinforces learning. I really should have made this a bigger slide. Employees are actively questioned and listened to, and there's opportunity to dialogue and debate. I'm not going to read the whole thing. That opportunity to dialogue and debate is going to rest with the competency level of whoever the supervisor is. Now, why do I say that? Because employees are going to respond based on the relationship that they have with their supervisor, all right? And so if you are supervising other folks and you are not comfortable with people disagreeing with you, if you're not comfortable with hard conversations or difficult conversations, then what happens is your employees are going to shut down, right? Because you're constantly teaching them by your behaviors or lack thereof. And so in order for us to really take advantage of being a learning organization, it's critical that the leaders in the organization are actually open to that input, that they're open to dialogue, that they're open to having hard conversations, and recognizing that that space is critical to the organization being flexible and adapting to the changing environment and the constantly changing landscape that we're dealing with right now. All right. Next slide, please. All right, so durable systems change. Now, one of the things I thought about was I always get this wrong, the circle of human concern. This goes back to Professor John A. Powell again, right? And that circle of human concern is where everyone is within the circle, receiving everything that they need, experiencing a deep sense of belonging. And that doesn't mean that we're all doing the same things. We are allowed to be our full, unique selves within the circle of human concern. So what I'd like for you to do right now is to think about your organization, and then think about the division or the department that you are located in your organization. And then take it a step further, think about the team that you're on, all right? Now, do employees experience a sense of belonging on your team, in your department, and in your organization? Are there employees that you can think of right now who have expressed a sense of not belonging, a sense of being othered, a sense of being outside of the circle of human concern? And if so, here's what we want to consider. I identified 4 elements that can assist with helping employees experience a sense of belonging. And that is feeling valued, right? We all want to feel valued. We want to know that the work that we're doing in our organization, that it's important, that it's meaningful. We want to get that kind of feedback that allows us to develop a sense of connectivity to the work and to the organization, but also affirms that what I'm doing is good, and what I'm doing is beneficial, not just to myself and to the team, but to the organization. So feeling valued. And then equitable policies and practices. Think about, again, your organization. Do the policies and practices, do they apply to everyone? Or are there some folks who are held accountable to certain policies, and other folks, because of their positionality, it seems as though they don't have to adhere to those policies or practices at all? Are there practices that are being engaged in that are those unspoken norms, right? After you've been in an organization for quite some time, there are these unspoken norms. And unfortunately, those unspoken norms work to create an experience where other employees feel like they are outside the circle of human concern. And so you want to consider that. And then moving on to equitable benefits and compensation, right? We're not going to go deep into this, but again, think about your organization. You can think about yourself. Are employees being compensated with a true livable wage? Are there benefits? Are the benefits that are being provided, are those benefits enough to help your employees maintain their employment in a way that is healthy and balanced for their larger life? All right, so, or are you a part of an organization where there is conflict because employees have identified that this person holds the same position that I do, and everything else is comparable, and yet because of maybe their gender or their race or their relationships within the organization, they receive a higher or a broader and deeper benefit and compensation package. And then the last one is access to opportunities. So do you have access to opportunities? Does your organization provide access to opportunities? And the kind of opportunities we're referring to here are opportunities to develop oneself as a leader, to develop oneself just as a professional, are opportunities open for everyone. And not only are they open for everyone, but going back to creating those systems and processes, is there a clear, transparent process in place where employees are, they understand and they are aware of the opportunities, and they are aware of the process that they need to engage in to access those opportunities. I can't tell you how many times over and over again in many different organizations where I find that there is a huge discrepancy, and often those discrepancies fall along the lines of race. And some of that is because, it can be that as a person of color, maybe I am new to the organization and I'm new to the workforce. I don't know the questions to ask. I don't know what the norms are. And so just thinking about access to opportunities and who gets those opportunities, how are those opportunities communicated, how are they disseminated out, who gets to make decisions about who does what and who doesn't. All right, next slide, please. I'm doing great, got 9 minutes left. Did we go? Oh yeah, okay, sorry. I'm the one that's slow over here on this side. All right, and so then, same thing for our clients, right? Or the constituency that you serve, and thinking about durable systems change. Do your clients, do they experience a sense of belonging? And if they don't, what needs to change in order for them to experience this? So thinking again about what it means for a client to feel valued. Are they being respected from the first touch point? Are they being listened to? Do they feel heard? Are their questions being answered? Are they being responded to in a timely manner? These are some of the elements that go into helping our clients feel a sense of belonging and experience being valued. Equal access. If you wonder why I'm taking a moment, it's because, again, it's very tiny on my screen here. Equal access to services and, what did I write there? And products. Right, so clients. Are all clients made equal? Are all clients given the same opportunities? Are all clients provided with the same amount of information so that they can actually access the type of services that they need? And you can think about this too from the back end side of the organization, more technical. What are the processes that we need to change? What are the functions that need to change so that clients can more easily access the services and products that we want to offer to them? And then looking at timely, accessible, and respectful communication. I talked about that a little earlier. And you know, for those of you that are part of the legal profession, and when we're thinking about things like some of the crisis lines, and not just the legal profession, but in particular, I was thinking about the CLEAR hotline, and when folks are calling for legal assistance, and it can take some time to get back in contact with clients, and there are many different reasons why, right? It's not always about the organization or a particular staff member not wanting to engage and not being open to creating ease for the client to access. Sometimes it's just a matter of the system itself being overwhelmed with the amount of requests. But in order for clients to still experience a sense of belonging and feel valued, how we communicate that is really important. So if you're in an organization that is experiencing a high number of calls for assistance or requests for assistance, then consider what are some of the things that you could put in place to communicate on a regular basis some updates. You know, our line is experiencing an extremely high number of calls, maybe Mondays through Wednesdays, and so it's best for you to call Thursdays through Fridays. And that's just a simple example I'm throwing out there, but it's something to think about. And then quality service. How are we showing up for them? Right? Especially during this time. How are we showing up for the clients that we're serving? And again, this goes back to, and this is why I always say, you've got to put your own oxygen mask on first. You have to make sure that you're taking care of yourself. You need to ensure that you're addressing your own stress levels, because if you don't, it's going to come out, because it has to come out somewhere. And the last thing I know that any of us want is for it to come out in a negative or less than positive manner in response to a client who is already suffering through trauma and increased harm. All right. Okay, and then we're going to go to our last slide here. All right, so here are some questions that I'm going to leave you with, and these are the things that that are just in place to help you consider how you're going to move forward in making the changes that you've identified need to be made. So what do you envision and hope for the future? When you go back through looking at the initial, give me just a quick sec here. When you go back to the phase 3 recovery and those 3 questions that I asked, like, what are you doing well? And what gaps have you noticed? And how do you effectively address the intersection of trauma, impact, and professional expectations? When you go back to that, and you also look at whether or not you're a learning organization, then these are the things that can help you envision a new future. These are the questions that can help spawn some ideas, because you'll have to create the space to critically think about not just where you've been, but where you are right now, where you want to go, and how you want to go, how you want to reach that goal. And so I want to encourage you to use that universal targeted universalism as a tool to help you process through that. Now, these 3 questions, I'm going to leave you with these 3 questions on the side. Well, they're not questions, but they're something to think about. So as you consider the future, as you're thinking about creating systemic, durable change within the context of your organization, the gaps that you've identified and the things that you've identified that you've done well, will they allow you to provide the same service or product except you'll need to use a different method? Or do you need to consider the infrastructure of your organization? Are you going to keep the same infrastructure? Is the infrastructure of your organization working? What has COVID and what has the structural racism, what has the twin pandemics revealed to you about the structure of your organization? And if the structure is going to stay the same, does that mean that you need to provide a different service or product, right? This is all through the lens of the twin pandemic. And these are meant to help us really shake our organizations. We shake them so that the things that need to be changed can actually fall away. And those things that we're already doing well, when we do that shaking of our organization, they will stand, and they'll stand strong because they're supposed to. And so then last but not least, will you provide the same type of service, but use a different infrastructure, as I said earlier? The questions on the, see how many of it's like, maybe about 12 questions. I hope that you will use those questions to spur conversation and dialogue with your team, and think through what are the elements necessary for you not to just transform your organization to being an anti-racist, more inclusive organization, but how do you sustain that change? What are the elements necessary to sustain it? So with that said, I want to say thank you. Thank you very much. And we are now, I believe I'm giving it back to Jen. And yeah, thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, KJ. Thank you to Lori and to Ada for sharing these reflections. And we hope that these offerings, these frameworks, these questions are helpful to you as you think about envisioning that new future. We know that we sort of have the easy job, right? We can offer this out, but we can't decide what your team and your organization really needs in this moment. You are closest to your own work, and hopefully you're engaging the partners and the stakeholders and folks that are the closest to your work to really think about what the work looks like going forward. A couple of the questions that are in here are from a network called the Leadership Learning Community. The questions about, what are you going to let go of? What will you keep? What will you create? I love their framing for it. They talk about, like, what's your no going back story? Tying some of this together and thinking about, in this crisis that we're experiencing, how do we make sure this never happens again? How do we envision something entirely new? And like Adrienne Marie Brown says about organizing, it's really the science fiction work that we're doing, because we're aiming towards something that no one has ever really seen. But what a remarkable chance to do that. So we want to, this is the first time we've ever actually had the time for Q&A that we talk about wanting. So glad that we have a few minutes left, and want to invite folks in the chat to ask questions, talk about where you're stuck. We also would love to hear what are some of the things you and your teams are already thinking about what the future looks like and how it might look different. As you're thinking about that, and go ahead and put that into chat if you're interested. Also want to invite if Lori or Ada, if you have anything you want to add in this moment while folks are percolating on their questions, now's a great time for that.
This is Ada. I'm happy to jump in. Can you hear me?
We sure can, Ada. Thanks.
Oh, great. That was a lot in a very packed time, and it's clear from the chat pods that people really were engaged and trying to grasp onto everything. I think it's been mentioned that the slide decks will come out, so if you didn't take notes, you don't need to worry about that. You can have reference materials. And really, we've just scratched the surface of what there is because of limitations of time. But I just want to let you know that this is an iterative process. I loved Lori's slide that showed how the grieving process is a toggle process. You go back and forth. I think she called it a stew. And similarly with the phases, we will bump around, go to crisis, then we'll go to a space where we have the luxury in many ways of reimagining a different future. And this is very, very difficult, but so ultimately rewarding work that we all have the privilege to be able to participate in. So I think Lori and KJ did a great job of focusing on how much you do need to put your own oxygen mask on and then assist others, or you're no good to anyone. So, you know, be kind to yourself as well as to other people. And then I just want to tell this very, very quick story that to me helps me reframe the way I'm thinking over and over again. So I once heard an astronaut speak after he had come back from being in space for 1 year in a space station. And he said it took him an unbelievably long time to realize that since he was the official photographer and the window was above his head, that when he was strapped in to his chair, he had to crane his neck and get, you know, sort of neck carpal tunnels. And that with zero gravity, he could just release himself from the chair and use the ceiling as the floor. It took him a really long time to figure out that the old way of looking out the window was obsolete in his new environment. And I think, to me, looking at the twin pandemics as forcing us into an anti-gravity floating space where nothing is anchored where it was before these two pandemics. Everything is floating around in ways we don't really fully understand. But it's also a chance to start viewing things from totally different windows and having chances to see things that previously we really did not see because of all of the structural racialization that was covering our eyes. So just use these opportunities of massive convulsive change to see things through different eyes.
Thank you, Ada. That's a beautiful way of thinking about this. We're going to continue to stay on for a few minutes if folks have questions, and also want to add one more question for you to share out to Cynthia. This is the last piece in our 3-part adaptive leadership series. But obviously, Just Lead and our partners are committed to continuing to offer what is most needed and relevant to you all as our community. And we'll be continuing to offer lots of virtual opportunities for the foreseeable future as well. So let us know what you need, whether it's in the chat box or through email or conversation. We'd love to hear what else, other types of resources be most meaningful for you as you work towards this new future. We anticipate that we'll be putting out like our next kind of big partnership project will be a series of trainings for supervisors and best practices for more equitable supervision. I'm not sure what the timeline for that will be, but that's kind of our next big endeavor. But we are here and open to any feedback that you have. Amazing panelists, anything else you want to add before we do a soft close?
I will add something, just a reminder that we're in this for the long haul. I'm Black, so I've been in this all my life. All right, I'm just being really honest, but you're here and you showed up for a reason, and that means that you're invested. So take care of yourself so that you can stay in the game. Take care of yourself so that you can stay strong through the journey, because it's not going to be easy and it's not going to be quick. But if we all make a commitment to take care of ourselves, then we can collectively continue to push forward, you know, the agenda that we have for equality, for justice, for equity. That's all. That's my word of encouragement for the weekend, even though it's Thursday.
Thanks so much, KJ. And thank you all for being here. Bye-bye.